thank you guys so much for being here today. It's an awesome way to start the day, right? Like having a nice coffee and inspiring talks. And now we even get to talk about design systems. So what's a better way to start the day? So my name is Abel van Beek. I'm a software developer in Troms County. And I work with the public transport services there, which is called Svipper. Over the last 3 years, I've worked in 3 organizations working on implementing and creating design systems and component libraries. So I hope that some of that experience I can transfer to you. So as I mentioned, I work in Troms, which is a county all the way up in northern Norway. But as you might be able to tell by my name, I'm not originally from there, even though I'm trying really hard to look the part. I'm actually Dutch, and a Dutchman living in northern Norway, that means that I'm often 3,000 kilometers away from home, which can get pretty difficult at times. So at the beginning of this year, I was in the Netherlands, and I was having dinner with my family, my parents and my 2 sisters. And we were talking about northern Norway, and me working with public transport. And what they think about is glaciers and polar bears, lots of snowstorms. So the fact that we actually have public transport is for them pretty epic already. So after dinner, everyone had to head out because, well, we were in the Netherlands, right? They have their daily business that they needed to take care of. So I was left there with the dishes. But that's okay, I can take care of myself in northern Norway, so I can take care of some dishes for my family, right? So I gathered all of them, went to the kitchen and shoved them in the dishwasher. We have that there, that's fantastic. But then I figured out that we didn't have these dishwasher tablets. But I'm strong and independent now, so I have my license, jumped in the car, drove to the store. And the thing you should know about Dutch stores, they are like Disneyland to me. There's like so much choice. So when I got to the cleaning department, I had to choose between 15 different types of dishwasher tablets, where in Norway you would have to choose between 2. So I figured it would be okay if I tried to strike a balance between how expensive it is and the quality. So I bought the semi-cheapest ones and went home. And nothing too exciting, I turned on the dishwasher and it seemed to work. And then my dad came home. And the thing you should know about my dad is he usually does the grocery shopping and has control of everything that we have in the house. So he apparently knew that we didn't have these dishwasher tablets, and he figured I would do it by hand. And when he saw the type of dishwasher tablets I bought, he said, "Oh, but our dishwasher doesn't support those." So my dad did what my dad does. He went to the store, bought the correct ones, and basically redid what I had done the entire evening. And what I realized here is that the problem wasn't really that I was doing the dishes. The problem was that we are surrounded by these systems that we either consciously or unconsciously adhere to. But these systems, they are not documented anywhere. So how was I supposed to know what dishwasher tablets I was supposed to buy? So what I want to do today is to describe a way how we can create a vocabulary and put in place constraints in order to document these systems and to be able to talk about them. And these constraints are called design tokens. So now you know a lot about me, you know a lot about my family. I would say you're getting to know me pretty well. But you don't know Svipper that much. So Svipper is a service by Troms Fylkestrafikk, and it takes care of all the public transport in Troms. And for those of you who have traveled in Troms over the last half a year, might not even recognize this name. And that's because we recently ran through a rebrand from Troms Fylkestrafikk to Svipper in August. And the reason for this rebrand is that public transport has become so much more dynamic over the last 10 years. We went from these static bus stables where buses drive at specific intervals, right, to including so many more services, such as we're thinking about integrating with electric scooters. Maybe we want to have city bikes. Well, we don't happen to have trains in Troms, but maybe you want that too. Or maybe we want to include carpooling. And adding all these services in the Troms Fylkestrafikk brand wasn't really cutting it for us. So we created Svipper to be a platform that can contain all of these different types of functionality. And Svipper is part of an even bigger collaboration, which is called Offentlig Mobilitetssamarbeid, or OMS for short. And this is a collaboration between counties in Norway and public transport authorities, where the idea is that everyone contributes and everyone benefits. So currently we're approximately 11 counties in Norway that are part of this collaboration. This is not necessarily an exhaustive list, but it gives you an idea. And like I mentioned, the idea is that everyone contributes and everyone benefits, and that we don't have to reinvent the wheel for every public transport authority. So in this collaboration, for example, ATB has created a fantastic app that is now shared across multiple counties, and they laid the foundation for the design system that we're talking about today. From in Møre og Romsdal, they created this journey planner on the web that we are now also using across many different counties. And of course, Svipper is part of the collaboration, but another noteworthy partner is Antur. And for those of you who haven't heard about Antur, Antur is this national repository of public transport data, and they provide these foundational APIs for example, ticket sales and journey planning. So it's really great to have them in the collaboration. And then everyone contributes and everyone gets to use that software. So let me just walk you through a user journey of someone actually taking public transport in a specific county. And let's see what kind of technology we actually need to use there. And that will give you an idea of the scale of this OMS collaboration. So let's take my user journey. I went from Troms yesterday, took the plane to the airport here in Trondheim, and then had to make my way to the city, to the hotel here. So when I landed, what's the first thing I do? I first need to figure out who is the public transport authority in Trondheim. And maybe not everyone is lucky enough, like me, to be able to collaborate with ATB. But so you might need to go online, Public Transport Authority, Trøndelag, and you end up on the ATB website. And then what you'll find there is a journey planner. So what I did is I went from my location to the address of this hotel, and I'm not really known here in Trøndelag that well. So I was trusting the system here. So I'm using a journey planner. And then I found out that I can either take this airport express bus or I can take a train. So I figured, let's take the train, that's cool. So in order to buy a ticket, I needed to download the ATB app, and from there I could buy a ticket, and half an hour later I was actually at the hotel here. Awesome. And if I wouldn't want to use the mobile app, maybe I could use a web shop as well. So you can imagine that this user journey would have been very similar, be it in Trøndelag, or Møre og Romsdal, or Nordland, or Troms for that matter. So we have approximately 5 to 7 partners that are using these actual applications from the OMS collaboration. And together, we have 450,000 users in our mobile app alone. And if you also include other services, such as the web shop and the journey planner, we're up to 550,000 users. And this is approximately 10% of the Norwegian population. So it becomes really scary to work on a system like this as an individual. But this is really awesome as well. But you can imagine that we are creating a lot of complexity trying to solve these problems in this way, because all these different counties have different rules for example, ticketing structure, but they also have their own challenges, such as, for example, weather, and we need to be able to send notifications to all of our users. And last but not least, we also want to connect with our users. We want to be recognizable in each of these counties. And in order to do that, we needed to create a extendable, customizable design system. So what we did is we created a white label design system that we can use across different stacks. So we're using it on React and React Native, and use this in the OMS app. So this is the OMS app that some of you might recognize as the Fram app from Romsdal. Some of you might recognize it as the new Svipper app in Troms. Maybe you might recognize this as the Reis Noorland app. Or if you're a local here, you will recognize the ATB app. So today I'm going to walk you through what we did to implement this design system, use it as this scale, and how we can maintain it as well. But before we do that, we should maybe take a quick round trip about what the design system is, but more specifically, what a design system isn't. So this is a painting by René Magritte from 1929, and it's called The Treachery of Images. So what it says here in French is that this is not a cigar. And that's true, it's not a cigar, you can't smoke it, right? This is a picture of a cigar. And in the same way, this is not a design system. This is just a bunch of colors. It doesn't tell us where these colors should be used. If we have a button, what should be the hover color, what should be the active color. And in addition to that, how should our components interact? How should our screens be composed? We can't get any of that information out of a design system like this, which is how traditionally design systems looked. So what is the ideal situation for designers, right? Ideally, we would live in this design Disneyland that nowadays is called Figma. And what we do there is we define these colors, like I just showed you, but we take it one step further. So we sit with our colors, we give meaning to our colors, and use them in components. Then we create this component library in Figma, which is great. Now we can put them all together into beautifully designed screens where you think about accessibility. We have clickable big buttons that adhere to these contrast rules with enough contrast between the background and the foreground color. We even define spacing and sizing, typography. Everything is in here, and the screens look fantastic. This is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But then there is this other side, which is this Wild West world of development, where we have to reach our deadlines whilst implementing new features. And then there is this designer that comes up with this great new idea that we're going to implement this sprint. And the collaboration between developers and designers traditionally is a designer sends a screen to a developer, and the developer is trying to figure out what color is that, or use approximately this. It looks kind of similar to me. Looks great. The font, yeah, I know it's slightly different, but it doesn't really matter, right? So this is really interesting. And if I would ask you, as a user, what is the source of truth here? What's the thing you're interacting with? It's the world of the developers, right? That's the actual code that you're using on your machine. But internally, in your organization, which one is the source of truth? It's design, right? Isn't that weird? So ideally, we would be creating this bridge between design land and developer land. And this way, our developers don't need to look at, oh, what is this color? But we get the color directly from design and can use it in our code. So this way, we never have this uncertainty of which colors are we using, which sizing, which typography. It's just the designer giving you a building block, and then go ahead, play with your Legos. And these constraints are then called design tokens. But putting in place these constraints can be challenging. This means that designers and developers need to collaborate. They need to talk together about these constraints, and they need to agree that this is a rule set that we're going to adhere to. So the author of Atomic Design, Brad Frost, and Dan Mall, they have written an article about exactly this collaboration. And they coined a process that they call for hot potato process, which basically means discussions in quick succession and designers and developers collaborating on, for example, defining this set of rules. And then once we get designers and developers to agree, we have an awesome system with constraints in place that make sure that we don't buy the wrong dishwashing tablets. So now I want to show you in a more practical sense how we can set up a design system in such a way that we can try to make a process out of it. So this looks really similar to the picture I showed you was not a design system. So this is a design system in its traditional sense, where I'm defining a few colors. And more specifically, I have this blue color, which is called blue 1000 through 800. And I want this blue color to become the primary color in my design system. So now instead of directly assigning this blue button to my components, or this blue color to my components, I'm going to define a middle layer here. And this is called a semantic layer, or a layer that's adding meaning to my colors. So here I'm not calling this color blue anymore. I'm calling it primary. And in that sense, we have primary, primary hover, and primary active as our interaction states. And then I'm assigning that meaning to my components. And this paradigm also extends to other components than just buttons. You can use this in tooltips as well, but you can extend it as far as you like. So now we end up with this three-layered system. We have our color palette all the way at the top. Then we have a semantic layer that adds meaning to our colors. And then we have a component layer where we actually assign these colors to our components. And now if I want to maintain this design system, I can simply add, for example, a new color. So here I'm adding a new pink. Let's call it pink 1000 through 800. And I'm going to assign the pink color this meaning of primary now. And this is no rocket science. This is just variables. So you can already see what's happening, right? Like slowly these changes are propagating throughout our entire design system. So now all of our components that implemented the meaning of primary have changed color. And this also extends across other variables than just colors. So it can extend, for example, fonts as well. So we can change our font family or the font style. We can change the color of our text, of course. Maybe we would want to add an outline, a text shadow, how the text is outlined, and maybe even how we wrap the text. So what should happen when there's not enough space to fit the text here? If we should just cut it off, if it should move to the next line, or maybe we want to add these three dots that I always forget the name of. It's called ellipsis. I usually need to Google that. So basically, we can add all of these things that we're used to from CSS properties as design tokens. And that gives designers so much more control of what's happening in our applications. So that's a really cool concept. But now in practice, we still haven't really done anything. So right now, we still have the design Disneyland and our React code on the other hand. And they're still not touching. So let's do something about that. First, we have to define this three-layered structure in our design tool, which, let's say it's Figma, right? So here we're using Figma variables, which has recently come out of their beta program, which is really nice. Now we can actually use it in production with god samvittighet. So we have our color palette here. This is the first layer that we're defining. And we define a bunch of colors and their scales. And for each color, we are defining both a foreground and a background color. And this is to ensure this accessibility that I was talking about before, with having enough contrast between the text that we have on the background, for example. And this complexity that I'm talking about all the time, you can also see emerging here. So in the free version of Figma, you get 4 variable modes, but that wasn't enough for us, so we were using the enterprise plan of Figma. And you can see that here we have 7 different modes for 7 different public transport authorities, so 7 different color palettes in our design system. So then we're going to go to the second layer, and we're going to define meaning to these colors. That means we create another collection in Figma, and in this case I'm in the interactive tab, so this is basically where our interaction colors are. So here you see that interactive 0 is our primary color, and you see that the complexity has increased even more. So now we don't just have 7 modes, but we have 14, because for each public transport authority, we have a light mode and we have a dark mode. So then we define these primary colors for each public transport authority. And what that leaves us with is it allows us to create designs in Figma using our component library and to go through these Figma variables for each public transport authority when we're designing. And this allows us to see what the design or what the functional product is going to look like in the end for each public transport authority that's part of this collaboration, which is really powerful because we get to catch a lot of accessibility errors early in this stage. So you can see we're looking at the ATB light mode first, and this is the ATB dark app. So you can really get a sense of what your product is going to look like. So this is great. Now we've defined this 3-layered structure, but we're still kind of on the design Disneyland, right? So now we need to actually build a bridge, which is also called an API in our world. So you have 2 options here to get your Figma variables out of Figma. One of which is a plugin API, and we've created a plugin for this that's available for free for you today that you can go find on Figma. And this exports your variables as design tokens. And the way they are exported is called, it's a design token specification, which is created by this Web3 working group. So this is a standard across the industry. So you can either run this plugin, but for those of you who have larger, more complex organizations, kind of like us, the odds are that you're on the enterprise plan of Figma as well. And that allows you to use their REST API, which is really great. So we've created an NPM package, which is actually also used internally in the plugin API. And this is also, just go ahead and download it and use it in your stack. And what this does is it takes in the response you get from the REST API, and it spits out this design token specification. Pretty great. So I've been talking a lot about this design token spec. What does it actually look like? And this is not rocket science either. It's basically this JSON structure where the path to a leaf is kind of the name of the variable. So we have like interactive 0 default. And then it has some metadata. So it has these values, both the background and the foreground color, like you've seen from the Figma structure. And it has some other stuff as well. So you can see what type it is. And additionally, it exports the description from Figma, which doesn't really seem like much, but this is really cool because it allows us to create awesome documentation after the fact. So we have this design token spec. I hope you see that we're decreasing the complexity of the problem of building this bridge more and more. So now the problem is not getting Figma variables in code, but it's getting this JSON structure in code. And since this is a standard across the industry, there are tools for this that are called design token translation tools. And one of which is called Style Dictionary. And Style Dictionary is a tool created originally by Amazon to manage their design system, but it's also used by other large companies such as Adobe and Atlassian and us. And what this Style Dictionary allows you to do is to take this specification, and it provides a few predefined transformers, it's called, that you can run this specification through. And then what it plops out on the other end is either CSS variables or TypeScript variables, or you can even write your own custom transformer, which gives you a lot more control of the format that's going to spit out. And this allows you to use these design tokens basically on any stack. So also WPF, like Windows programs, or whatever you can think of. So if you run this through Style Dictionary, it leaves us with this compiled structure. So here you can see that we can access our primary color through color interactive 0 default. And then we have a choice between if we want to use a background color or if we want to use a foreground color. And for our foreground colors, we have a few options as well. If we want to use a primary, secondary, or maybe the text is disabled. And we can do the same thing. We can compile it to CSS variables, for example, or whatever fits your stack. And then for those of you using the REST API in Figma, you can actually house this inside of a GitHub action. And I also linked our GitHub action that you can look at how we manage this. You can scan the QR code there. This will also be recorded, so you can go back and watch it as well. And what that then does is give designers the opportunity to make changes in the design system. And then they go to GitHub, they press a button, and then what happens is we get the new variables, run them to Style Dictionary, and we create a PR with the changes of our design system. So we don't need to touch code anymore to maintain our design system. How cool is that? So the point that we've reached now is Figma and code touching. And to give you a sense of what this is like in an actual day-to-day developer workflow, here I'm trying to be both designer and developer, so bear with me. But this is the Svipper app, and what I want to do is I want to change the primary color, right? So on the right I have the simulator, this is Figma. So what I do is I go into Figma variables, I go to interactive 0, and I change the primary color from this dark orange to blue. All right, and then this applies directly in Figma. So now you can see that all the primary components have now turned to blue from this dark orange. And then there are a few steps that I need to go through. So first I get the new tokens, and this happens in this GitHub action that I was talking about. And lastly, I need to build the design system with the new tokens. And then if I pull up Figma and the simulator again, you see that the colors have instantly changed to this blue color. And now both the implementation and design are still in sync without the developer having to do anything. So this is really cool. But this is one of the systems that I was talking about. How useful is a system when it's not documented, right? So what I want to use as an example today of great documentation is called the Billy manual from IKEA. And you can think of this as your storybook for your component library, for example. And for those of you who haven't heard about Storybook before, Storybook is this great tool that integrates directly with your component libraries and allows you to both run visual regression tests on your components, but also document them in the same place. And it allows you to create basically anything with Markdown files to describe how you want components to be used together. Maybe you want to add some accessibility rules, etc. So that's a really great tool. But what should we put in that tool? First of all, we need some kind of quick start guide, right? Like what type of tools do you need? How much RAM does your computer need? Things like that. Maybe we recommend that you set it up together instead of doing it alone. And one really important thing here is this one down here. Because allowing our developers and designers to come with feedback is so important. Because we don't want them to just fork our repository and go build their own Disneyland somewhere else. So this way we are all working on a greater system. Additionally, something that IKEA is really good at, and I wanted to point out here, is nesting components. So for IKEA, it would become super expensive if they're creating one specific screw for each of their pieces of furniture. That would end up in thousands of screws. So what IKEA does, very smart, instead, is they create one screw that they reuse across all of their furniture. That's smart. Maybe we can do the same. So instead of creating a button that's called button, and a button that's called card button, we can try to reuse that same button everywhere. And this reduces the complexity of our system a lot and makes maintenance a lot easier. Additionally, what IKEA is really good at, you see it here on the top left, adding accessibility rules, what the component is and what the component isn't. Bookshelf is not a ladder. Good to know. So this is really awesome. Now we've talked about both a conceptual way of creating and maintaining a design system, but we've also looked at how we can implement this functionally and how it can work in a large organization such as this OMS, or Offentlig Mobilitetssamarbeid. So with this, there is one more thing that I would like to leave you with today. And this is a quote from the book Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. And I'm not going to pretend to actually have read this book. I was scrolling through YouTube Shorts and I came across this guy who was talking about the book. And I thought it was really powerful. So I wanted to share it with you today. And with my own twist, he says that if you have the capacity to create a flexible and a scalable design system, the value of that system does not just exist in that moment. But every time you use the system is a return on investment. So the more you use the system, the more wealthy you become. So after a year, after 2 years, you have become truly wealthy. And I hope that this inspires you to think about how design tokens as constraints can be used in your organization and help to make sure that no one ever buys the wrong dishwashing tablets again. Thank you so much.